I would like to ask, there's a lot of talk about the European Union. What's yes, Scotland's position on Europe? Because the reason why I ask, the line of traffic in Europe at the moment is for a more integrated European Union. And are we not jumping into bed of one union to another?
Okay, great, thanks. I think we'll probably find that our panel members have all got different aspects on that, because we mustn't confuse the yes or no in the referendum with the policies afterwards. But let's see, who would like to start answer first? Robin, go ahead.
Happy to kick off with that. Let's think wider than this. When we have an independent Scotland, we have a range of international relations that we can start negotiating again. Now, Matt, you personally is right now, for all its flaws, the EU probably is a club that we want to be involved in. The option of taking a Norwegian stance of having access to European markets and having to abide by the rules without having any voting capacity to change those European rules is probably the weakest. So I don't think there's any problem in saying that we're going to start to look at these kind of international relations again. But one of the things which, again, the British state, the British debate is very narrow about is where do we want these international relations to be? So it's quite a technical question to kick off with. But for example, the World Trade Organization used to define everybody in the world's trading relationships. Who do you trade with and how? The World Trade Organization has more or less broken down because a group of countries, mainly in Latin America, said we are kind of sick of being pushed about by the US, and the US was primarily trying to crack open all their indigenous economies so the US corporations could get a hold of it. So one of the points that I think is really worth thinking about is, what would our relationships be? We're going to be producing bilateral relationships with other countries in terms of trade and in terms of relations. That Latin American group called Mercosur, that's the name that they formed themselves. Mercosur is an incredibly rapidly growing economic bloc. They have similar sorts of economic attitudes and social attitudes, the kind of ones I was talking about, Commonweal, the kind of ones that I think are Scottish values. Why don't we start talking more seriously about what would our international bilateral trading relationship be with the Mercosur countries? Massive export potential, and to be quite honest, if we're going to have international trade, let's make it Latin America with the people dance and drinks good. So there's lots of things that we can start to do when we think about this international stuff. And we've got to not be taking all of this straightforwardly from the pages of the newspaper that say, are you in the EU or are you not? It's not what clubs you join, it's what you do when you join a club that matters. And if we can start to think about how we do this, one tiny little point as well, which I think is really interesting in Scotland internationally. If any of you were the march in Edinburgh a couple of weekends ago, you'd have seen the Sicilians, the Corsicans, the Basques, the Sardinians, the South Tyrolese, the Venetians, the Cornish, the Welsh, the Irish. Every single one of these nations right now, or these regions which wish to become nations, right now is looking to Scotland. If we break this, and if we do this, if we can break out of the neoliberal English model, the model of British model of politics, if we can get out of that, and we can start to set a new direction which says small countries which reflect the will of their people is the way forward for the 21st century, we're the pioneer in Europe. We have got so much goodwill right across these micronations across Europe. And I think we should think seriously about what happens if we start taking a leader position.
Thank you.
Maybe just going back to more of the kind of practical points around membership of the European Union as well. I mean, I think as well, the process would be that Scotland notify the European Union we intend to remain a part of Europe, but also, you know, going back to what some of the points that Robin said is about how you use that to influence the way in which your country can grow and develop. And Scotland at the moment has a kind of a little bit of a role within Europe, but we don't have a full kind of nation-state role within Europe at the moment. And that means, for instance, you've got people like Richard Lockhead or previous rural ministers getting kept out from the top table decisions, where you find a landlocked country like Luxembourg has more say over your fishing rights than you do as a country. And that's not the normal state of affairs, to coin the phrase that Peter talked about. That's not normal. If you've got an industry that you want to do your very best for, then you deserve to have that top table say, and the only way you can get that is by being a nation state and by saying yes next year to enable Scotland to have that voice at the top table in the European Union. And that's the benefit that we get from independence, is that we get to take decisions like Robin outlined beyond the European Union about all the other kind of international groupings that you might want to align yourself with. That's the benefit of having independence. Those decisions become a reality for you. They're not some kind of esoteric kind of notion that you may want to one day think about or would like to have if the people down in London were going to allow you to develop that. That's the benefit of independence. You can make your own decisions, you can influence the top table in the way that Ireland does, in the way that countless other small independent nations around Europe do, and they do it and they benefit from it. And that's what I believe the benefit from independence would be in Europe.
Thank you very much.
I would argue slightly more than proportional share of that debt. It would come from the same place. It's the same as when people ask who would pay the pensions and who will pay welfare benefits. The same people as do now. We're paying for these things now. We're not the beneficiaries of anybody's charity.
It's also noticed that the bill said the UK government are borrowing 9.6% on our behalf, but we're actually paying interest back on 9.9% of borrowing. So we're actually paying a lot more back now than we would do as an independent country.
And we've historically put more into the coffers as well, so there's a point in which when you're negotiating a yes vote next year would mean you enter into a negotiation about the settlement that will come about for ahead of Independence Day, which is kind of earmarked in 2016. And because Scotland's put far more into the coffers, then you wouldn't necessarily want to go into that negotiation just assuming you're going to pay a proportion of the population share, that actually, because you've put more in, that actually the debt that you kind of then are liable for could be less. So Scotland's got quite a strong hand to play, and we don't necessarily need to take the way that's been framed in the newspapers and by the Project Fear.
Can I pick up one important point in this one here, which is driving me up a hole? First of all, Scotland is not some weak, useless nation that's incapable of negotiating. The idea that, I think, what's his name? Ed Balls this week says, I'm not letting you use the currency, I'm not bluffing. Do you want to see what it looks like when you're not bluffing, mate? We have your nuclear weapons up here. Do you want to sniff it? Do you want access to your military bases? But this is the point. At this point so far in the national debate, we've got to a crazy situation where we've started talking about the liabilities and not the assets. So is everyone in this room familiar with the fact that we own 10% of the London Underground? For the last 50 years, we have been told the London Underground is national infrastructure. We paid 10% of it. We'll take that off our national debt. Anyone know what Diego Garcia is? It's an entire island that we own in the middle of an ocean, an entire island with a military base. 10% of that is ours. 10% of all of the overseas property assets in the UK owns everywhere is ours. If the UK thinks we're paying off the credit card debt and it's keeping a flat screen telly, it's kidding itself.
More questions from the floor?
I was going to add something.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It was just in the past week, courtesy of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs actually published figures splitting out the revenues that were obtained from Scotland and other parts, or other regions as they call it, of the United Kingdom. And since the beginning of devolution, had we been independent, we would have had something in the region, according to their figures, which I presume are fairly modest or conservative, an extra £34 billion. We wouldn't have a debt in Scotland. Thank you.
Going on to that point, I won't pay a hell of a lot of tax. 85% of that goes to London. I know that a lot of money goes to Scotland from after the Yes campaign.
Yeah. Can I pick up the tax here? Because I know this is a bit pointy headed as well, but the UK tax system is insane. Now, that's not my opinion. Nobel Prize winning economist Middle East, did the Middle East review. He's an insider. He's not what you would call a crazy radical. He's a leading global financial expert. He did an analysis of the UK tax system, and his conclusion was it's absurd. The UK tax system has largely been designed by secondees from accounting companies who went in there and filled it with loopholes so that the international corporations don't have to pay tax, and they don't, and we know this. But poor Scotland, nothing we could do about it, is there? This is another one of the great myths about the British state. Oh, nothing's possible, it can't be done. Let me just put this as simply as it's possible to put it. It is perfectly legal to tax a corporation on a proportion of its global turnover according to how much trade it did in your country. They can neither disguise the trade in your country, nor can they disguise the global profits. You can choose immediately to finally, once and for all, end all corporation tax evasion, which not only brings a hell of a lot more revenue into the coffers, but it means for the first time in our lifetime, a Scottish company would pay the same tax as its multinational competitors. The point about tax is that almost anything other than what we've got would be better. It is an absolute mess, and rebuilding a tax system is one of the most positive things that we will get to do in about 18 months' time.
I'm very interested in the Constitution, and if we were to vote yes for independence, I presume that most of the panel would hopefully favour when we read the Constitution. If there's one thing, you pick one thing to enshrine in that Constitution, each member of the panel, what would it be?
Good question.
I thought of this bit very straightforwardly, what I would like to see enshrined in the Constitution of Scotland is a very clear statement that the state and all government is an agreement between its citizens and exists only so long as the citizens give that its consent. Now, I think this is a very important point. It has a long Scottish tradition, going all the way back to the Declaration of Growth, which says, right, we'll have a king, but so long as that king represents our interests. Now, to embed that again, the whole UK debate is what will the state give you? If we embed that in the consciousness of the Scottish people through a constitution, a state is nothing more than an agreement between its citizens, and when we are not happy, it loses its legitimacy. If you embed that in the very concept of Scottish democracy at the kick-off of a new country, I think it will change our attitude and our relationship with politics, and we will not accept this British model of this is what you're getting. We'll say, no, this is what we're taking. So that's what I'd like to see in the constitution.
What would you like to see?
I think one of the most important points, which is quite sort of bizarre, I suppose, in a lot of people, is to be able to have, as a country, to protect our fisheries and the waters around our coasts. I think that we've been plundered by too many countries and have no control over them for a long, long time, and it's going to stop. I think within the constitution, it should be that Scotland's waters are for Scotland's benefit.
Well, certainly from the SNP's point of view, they've put a number of different ideas about what could form a written constitution. One of the things that would be appealing to me, I think, is that tuition and education should always be free for people who want to pursue that route. But I think the good thing about a written constitution and the discussion that you've started is about making sure that everyone realises that they've got a stake in how the country will look in the future, that it's going to be a process by which everyone can be involved, and making sure that governments of the day actually listen to what people are telling them, that you can be part of the negotiating team for Scotland, you can be part of the way in which Scotland will look like after independence, and that's the benefit of a written constitution. It's not just about the views that we have as panellists here tonight, it's about what you think should be the bedrock of that country moving forward, and that's a really positive thing in itself, and I think it is a very powerful tool that this is not just about politicians, this is about everyone having a stake in the type of Scotland that we seek to create.
I think that's a really good point. So before I bring Peter in, maybe there's some people in the audience who would actually like to say what they'd like to see in the Constitution. Can anybody come up? Yes, the gentleman asked the question.
Kind of national assets like Scottish water should be kind of, they can't be sold off, they will remain in public hands.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Yeah.
The Greens, the SNP and the Scottish Socialists have already decided that there should be a clause in the Scottish Constitution prohibiting nuclear weapons in Scottish land or waters. Anybody else manage to quickly formulate something that you would like to see in the written Constitution? Yes? I'll come round. Hang on.
I just always believed that members of Parliament were voted into office by people to work on behalf of the people, to make the country a better country than what everybody else wants. And I think the only way to do that in the future is to vote yes and to have Scotland get its independence. It's easy for me.
Thank you. Before we take another question, Peter, did you have anything to say on the issue?
No, Robin and Aileen stole my lines again. Probably the first next time. Perhaps good to summarise it though. At the very core, as Robin says, is this concept of the sovereignty of the people. That is going to be, and it has to be at the core of the Constitution, along with other things that have been mentioned, limits on the powers, or the clear definition of the powers of those who govern us, and measures to ensure there's no point in people being sovereign if they're not actually participating in government. So we've made some steps towards that, such as with the Public Petitions Committee, but we need more of that kind of thing. Good democracy is participative democracy, and that has to be dealt with in the Constitution.
I wonder how many people here imagine, just a few years ago, the prospect, the excitement of contributing to the development of a new nation and its constitution.
Well, I think we've got
We can all be part of that.
Just to pick up on something that you said about fisheries.
Yes.
If Scotland decides we're going to take back fishing rights and scrap half the common agricultural policy, and Europe says get stuffed, and you embrace Europe, what would it do?
Well, that's where negotiations come in, wouldn't it? I mean, we could take the stance of maybe Norway.
Yeah, but I think that as well, because Scotland would be there as a nation state as well, we would have a far greater and far stronger hand to be going into the European Union with as well, to fight our corner in the way that you see Ireland, who've had the presidency, they're able to negotiate, they're able to do and have the discussions, they're free to interact with other countries on a level of equality with other countries around Europe as well. So our hand will be strengthened because we're a nation state, and we're able to make sure that our industries, the things that are kind of important to Scotland, are protected. At the moment, fishing doesn't really kind of form a huge part of the kind of UK's kind of idea about what's important. So yeah, and then you see that Richard Lockhead or other ministers get locked out of those top table decisions. So that's the benefit, is that you have a stronger hand because you're a nation state and you're able to speak on behalf of the industry and of the people that you're
I think as well, part of your question was about maybe the EU are going to get upset with us for trying to do something they don't agree with. Yeah? We're in a very strong negotiating position as well. We already have 25% of renewable capability for the whole of Europe, don't we? Yeah, when it comes to wind and water power and what have you. So, and we've got so much to offer Europe, that Europe are going to want to negotiate with us. Yeah? At no point is Europe going to say, no, we don't want you.
But is that owned by us, or has it been sold off to EDF, NPower?
No, we've got the capability, that's the renewable capability we have across Europe. That's things that are going to happen in the future, that's things that happen now. It's not just the wind farms, it's not just the turbines. We're talking about the wave power, the hydro power that's ongoing at the moment as well.
And can I answer that? We published a report on the weekend about this. I mean, the first thing is, I would have answered to that one is, on the other hand, let's be realistic. I was being a little bit playful with the ball stuff. We have a very strong negotiating position, and then Europe weak isn't true. But I find myself quoting the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want. Try sometimes, you can need. We're not going to get everything. Nobody gets everything they want. There's going to have some negotiation. But when you're coming to those issues, things like energy ownership, again, the British belief that we're powerless is utterly wrong. We showed at the weekend how for no greater cost than it's going to cost us anyway. We pay for our energy whether we own it or whether they own it. They don't pay for our energy. We pay for our energy no matter what. And we just showed that it's very simple to just simply say, nah, we're having it. Under European Union law, we can take the grid infrastructure immediately back into collective ownership. We've paid for it. We were the people that subsidised it, the government subsidised it. You can do some of these things absolutely straightforwardly, routinely. On the fishing rights, I suspect that we're going to have a fair bit of give and take there, because there's other aspects where we're going to want access to their waters. So there's going to be more give and take, and it's going to take time. But the one thing that Britain would like to believe is that international negotiations lead to gridlock and devastating problems for everyone involved. Really? Where? Who? International negotiations go surprisingly fluently. They tend to come to pretty good resolutions fairly quickly, because the whole point is we are an interconnected world and people do need to work together and we do need access to each other. So yeah, it's going to take a bit of time, but it's not undoable.
Robin, I just have a thought. As we own 10% of Gibraltar, we could offer that as a sweetener to Spain.
It occurred to me, the only thing I haven't looked into in this one is the extent to which, of course, Gibraltar is sub-owned. You know, the actual private land isn't owned. I've been trying to get my head around exactly what is our rights over Gibraltar and what we might bribe Spain with, but I'll need to get an expert.
Right, well, before we hit our separate heads on that rock, let's ask this gentleman over here who has a question.
Thank you. As I understand it, constitutions are invariably matched by standing orders, which can be matched by legal procedures. This has resulted in Britain developing an establishment and a series of civil servants where, as an ordinary punter trying to make a point, you're moved from pillar to post, you get diverted answers, you never reach the people who really matter and who are taking the ultimate decisions. Can the Constitution ensure that the normal person can get access to the highest offices in our land?
I think that probably comes down to...
Let me be clear about a couple of things. First of all, I kind of hinted it in the wee speech. The belief in autopilot politics is a myth. There is no point in which you create a perfect system, flick a button and it runs itself. Every system that was ever created by any human anywhere in the world requires day in, day out work to make it work. Bureaucracies tend to pull power in towards themselves. You have to fight them. What can we put in the Constitution that will address this? First of all, less high office and more distributed power. If we have in the Constitution a straight statement of subsidiarity, which is to say powers should be held as close to the place where the impact on as is possible, then suddenly everything starts to look quite different. I didn't talk about local democracy, there wasn't enough time in the opener, but if you look at the Nordic countries, and I've been using Biggar all over Scotland as a case study for this, and finally I'm talking to people at Biggar. Let's pick Biggar. If we were like a Nordic country, Biggar would have its own elected town council. In fact, if we were like any other country in Europe, we're the only country in Europe that has no local democracy. We'd have an elected town council, which would have the budgets over our local roads, our local transport, absolutely our childcare. We would have a generous childcare budget which would be held by Biggar council. But, and this is where it starts to get quite amazing, in the Nordic countries, what we would call a community council holds the budget and the policy responsibility for its local hospital. So, you see how you get to high office. The simple answer is, if we had a Nordic-style local democracy in Biggar, and we wanted between us to ensure that the Kello had longer opening hours or a permanent accident emergency service, it would be within our power to decide that we were going to do that. We would have to find the money, we'd have to direct it from somewhere else, we might have to do something with taxes if that was our will to do it. But we can do it. So the answer is, subsidiarity is how you deal with this. That's how you get away from bureaucracies pull actual decision making closer to us. And the assumption that there's a castle on the hill and we have to keep storming it over and over again is the wrong way to put it together. Subsidiarity, bring power to us, give us control, and then we become high hegions. And there's stuff that comes with that, because then we're not going to have to argue over what the hell we're doing with our local hospital. So there's ups and downs with any constitutional outcome, but this is one of the reasons, and this is really important. One of the reasons the Nordic countries are so good at what they do is that they're very highly directed by the citizens. They are not centralised. Citizens can decide their own priorities, and when that happens, they make better decisions. That's really how it works. Let people decide. They'll make mistakes, but overall, over the piece, they make better decisions for the local communities when they've got the power.
In a large way, the fact that the Scottish Parliament exists has brought democracy closer to home in the areas that we have competence over, and you already hear that when you speak to, I don't know, for instance, the NFU or whatever, farmers or whatever, they can say, I've got the rural cabinet secretary I can go and speak to directly in a way that I wasn't able to do before devolution, where you had the minister based down in London. So in that way, devolution has shown what can be achieved when you have that little bit of independence. But absolutely, Robin's right. This isn't, yes vote next year isn't the end game. It isn't about taking the powers from London and just plonking them back down in Edinburgh. This is about moving democracy closer to the people, and that's the exciting prospect that independence can bring, because that's not a reality at the moment with the current setup. It's about how do you move democracy further down the line to empower communities, empower people to make decisions that benefit where they live. And I think that in itself, that empowering factor of independence is what I think is exciting for areas like Biggar, where you can see, in comparison to other countries around the world, where local towns have flourished because they've got that trust. They're not being treated like children. It's not a parental approach that you maybe see in some of the local authorities across the country at the moment.
And where then does the closure of all the police stations across Scotland fit into that concept?
I think if you're talking about the police counters, well, there's already a consultation on at the moment, and that is being kind of led by Police Scotland. So that, there's an opportunity there for people to feed it.
Police Scotland.
Yeah.
Okay, but I know that there's a gentleman actually at the back with another question, so let's go to him first.
We'll come back to that one. Use the police station.
We will come back to that later on, but this poor gentleman was waiting before you jumped in.
It's actually going back to Suzanne's point, and something that I think a lot of people forgot about, and it's just asking the panel what their views would be once the Scottish Parliament took full control over the Crown estates, because obviously that's an important element of our seas.
And other things as well, other parts of land and assets as well. So I think there's a lot of things around land reform that at the moment can't be touched because of the Crown estate. So I'm a daughter of a tenant farmer. I know very, very first hand how destructive the feudal system in Scotland can be. So absolutely, I think there's opportunities there to make sure that there's far greater access and far greater ability and opportunity for Scotland to reap the benefits of the land and the seas that we have around the country.
I think from my point of view, as I said, I'm a sort of Republican. I don't believe that any country can be a true democracy when one family is exalted above all others, just purely by their birthright.
I think we have to be very wary too, when we're talking about local democracy, we have to be very wary of the British parties, especially British Labour's newfound enthusiasm for local democracy, and the idea that this can be achieved satisfactorily with devolution. That's just not the case. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to trust any system of local democracy that is organised between London and the British parties at a local level. That's not going to inspire any confidence in me at all. It has to be independent.
We have in response to what you were talking about before?
It was really just, Robin's been very good tonight with a utopian vision of what Scotland could be. But the reality is we've got an SNP government, and at the moment they would like an independent Scotland, and more we're getting a more centralised policies. Things like a council, a local council cannot determine its own rate of local council tax, and it's
Can I just say, I think that comes back to what I was just saying a moment ago. I'm not at all sure. I don't concede that there has been this great amount of centralisation, but to a certain extent it's necessary because the government in London will try to drive a wedge between the Scottish people and the Scottish Parliament if they get the opportunity. And my great concern is that local democracy without independence, without the Scottish Parliament having full powers, would be used by the British parties and the UK government to do precisely that, to drive a wedge between the Scottish people and their Parliament. So to a certain extent, to whatever extent there is centralisation at the moment, it's necessary, it's realpolitik, it's the circumstances that are driving this.
However, I do have to defend it. Saying a little bit from this one, I've worked in politics my whole life, I've done it professionally. Every bureaucracy in the world will pull power towards itself indefinitely until you stop them. This is just an absolute rule. Every single bureaucracy I've ever worked with pulls power inwards. The only thing that reverses it is giving people the capacity to pull power backwards. And I will be critical. The SNP has been, in my view, captured by some of the civil servants who said we need one national police force. No, we absolutely didn't. There's been no savings, there's going to be no savings. It was sold on a false premise. All that happened was a whole bunch of private sector research structuring companies made an absolute fortune, incidentally the ones that suggested it in the first place, and a whole bunch of people who were driving it from the beginning get paid off for big loads of money and then re-employed back into jobs. This is bureaucracy serving themselves. And no, there is no political party that has come into government in Scotland since devolution that has a good record in decentralisation. This is what I was saying about the difference between powers which people grant you as a gift and powers which belong to you. The importance about democracy is it must belong to you. There is always a reason for pulling more and more power into the centre and further away from you. We need to have the capacity to stop it happening. And again, without being too geeky about this, you can actually go back and read Greek and Roman philosophers from 3,000 years ago writing about exactly this same thing. So don't kid yourself on that ever you get a political system that doesn't start to do things which suits it, the system, rather than the people. That's why finding ways to keep it honest is the key.
Thank you.
And you mentioned the water throughout Scotland and Westminster and everything else, and the borders. And I'm sure the foreign audience here know that I think Tony Blair just a few years ago shifted the Scottish border, and instead of going to Berwick and Crete, it now goes to Cabrisi. So when you look out over the bay, it's now you're looking at English water. When they did that, they also took, I think it was an oil well and a couple of gas wells. When we get independence, will we get that back?
Yes. No, but I was going to negotiate that we can get Glastonbury.
Okay, we've got a question in the back here.
Hi, my thing about this referendum and the vote, and that people have got to remember, this is a vote for Scotland, first and foremost. This is a vote for your children and their children and their children. This is the future of the Scottish people. Now, we talk about the scaremongering. We should do a bit of scaremongering and get people off their backsides and into this. Because if we don't win this, we're going to take one hell of a kicking.
Can I perhaps...
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I perhaps make a response to that? Because I think it's an entirely relevant question, and some of this may be slightly my fault. My professional background is as a political strategist. So that's really what I did. How do you win things? How do you get stuff to happen? Now, very early on in this, I wrote a paper for Yes Scotland, in which I put forward a simple, straightforward thing, and this remains true, even though I'm not 100% however it was going with the campaigns. In a contested debate, if it is nasty and hostile and fearful and scary, people tend to return to safety of where they are. If it is open and consensual and involving and inviting, it makes people feel good about moving towards yes. Now, this has been specifically a core part of the Better Together strategy. I can talk you through, there's not time. Their attempt to narrate a story which says this is a nasty debate is not true. And again, if anyone was in that march in Edinburgh, it was one of the most joyous things that I've been involved in my life. It isn't a nasty debate. I've been involved in politics for years and it's no worse than usual. They have tried to create this sense that it's nasty, and they, as you know, are using the fear stories. What we have to do is be clever about how we get this and how we change this tone. If we turn it into a nasty debate and back in reverse, they win. That's what they want to happen, a nasty, uninspiring, spiteful debate. At the risk of sounding a bit over the top here, we have to be a bit Gandhi about this. There are ways to show that what we have is wrong, and you can do it through demonstrating what compassion could change, rather than spitting at or screaming at what is wrong just now. So I don't want to look at yesterday at all. I don't want to look backwards at all. And to be quite honest, remember this. I didn't do this that earlier on. Britain is now the most geographically unequal country in the developed world. In Scotland, because we've got a parliament, isn't the worst off. There was a period of time in which London City grew economically by 35%. During that same time, South Wales grew by 3%. That's not even the same country. Not now, that's not the same country. And one of the things that I say over and over is this isn't about Scotland. It's not about the people of England, because the people of England have been screwed over as much as, if not more, by Westminster than we have. We have the capacity to look after ourselves. So what we have to do here is not set up oppositions between us and them, us and England, us and individual people. We have to set a tone which says today isn't good enough. It's not good enough for me, and I choose to make a decision towards a better future. Now that's how we say what we have isn't good, but let's not take this tone down into the gut where they want us to take it.
Campbell Robbins just said it's probably not a good idea to get me started on the consequences of a no vote. Because if you think Project Fear's good at scaremongering, some of the stories that I could tell you about what's likely to happen in the event of a no vote could teach them a few lessons. On this one, I actually wrote a blog article last June, and I got a wee bit of stick for it, for much of the same reasons as Robin has explained here, because it was called what does no really mean? It was looking at the possible consequences of a no vote, and at that time nobody was talking about that. So I got a little bit of stick about it, but what I found most surprising was that the majority of the people who spoke to me about it thought I was underestimating the effects. They thought I was being too moderate in my approach to that. Most of them thought the consequences of a no vote would be utterly catastrophic. And to a certain extent, I think we're not being totally honest with people in the debate if we don't speak about that. I know we've got to do it in a sensible and a cautious way, but people are making a choice, and they have to know the implications of both choices.
Thanks, Peter. We also do need to make it very clear, though, that Devo Max is not on the table. Thanks, Suzanne. Right, the question, please.
Just going back to your local democracies here. Is it wise, given the fact that the youth of today just don't care? Well, you can have a look about, and to be fair, There's a lot more of the older generations in the crowd. I'm just wondering, to give that kind of power to, well, give that kind of thing, give that kind of power to local generations where they're not really interested in what happens anymore. I'm voting yes, by the way. I totally believe in the power of vote, but there's a lot of people out there that just do not bother.
I think I maybe disagree with that kind of the premise there. I understand maybe where you're coming from, but there's apathy in lots of different age groups as well. In fact, I kind of see quite a lot of younger folk, not least my 2-year-old son as well, who's probably bringing down the age demographic here. But you know, the 16 and 17-year-olds is quite an important step in terms of making this an inclusive referendum. It's the 16, 17-year-olds can work, they can get married, they can join the army, they can do a number of different things, and they don't have a say in where that taxation is spent. So at the moment, I think the ones that are going to have the most time to spend in this country, the country that we're seeking to create, are 16 and 17-year-olds, so we should encourage them to get involved. And actually, in the schools that I go to, and all the different folk that you speak to, some of the most informed people are 16 and 17-year-olds who know as much about the debate that's going on. They're thinking about it, they're talking to their friends about it as well. So while they might not be here, I don't think that equates to them not being interested in what's going on. In fact, we've got Ewan Purchase here, who's from Carluke, and when he was a 16-year-old, he wrote to me and asked me if I thought that 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote the referendum. That was him off his own back. He wrote to me probably before he got involved in the SNP, and that's what kick-started a lot of the thought from the government about 16 and 17-year-olds getting involved in the referendum. And I think there's an awful lot of negativity around young people in the papers, and that's something we've got to counter. This hall's probably home to the Scouts, the Guides, the Brownies, whatever, lots of different youth groups doing fantastic things in our community. And that's the things that we don't get to read about or to hear about in the papers. It's always the negative stuff, and I think we've got to be careful about just drawing assumptions and drawing about young people, because they are interested, they are engaged. We've got to do more, and we can never assume, though, as politicians or whoever, or older folk, what young people will be interested in. We've got to properly engage in a meaningful way, in a way that they want to engage in this debate. And it's probably our fault that maybe there's not more young folk here. We need to think about how we address that in a much more creative way.
I think I can get this lady's desperate to say something, so perhaps.
I just wanted to add that I think the young lady that sang to us tonight is a great inspiration to show us that young people are interested in politics and can be.
Yeah. Just to speak on behalf of Yes Clydesdale, who are the campaign group in this part of the world, we're very well aware that engaging young people is an extremely important thing. It's also a big responsibility as well. So it is in our plans to engage those young people on their own terms. They wouldn't be seen dead in a meeting like this, most of them. And it's not about dragging them away from their Xboxes. It's about appealing to them in their own language, and also playing music that they probably appreciate a wee bit more.
Thank you, Doc.
But can I add one very important? This is really important.
Very quick.
And it's absolutely central to this. There's an international, political, regularly identified doctrine. This is absolutely true. If you want people to act responsibly, give them responsibility. Young people in this country have made the right assessment. They have grown up in an era where their vote doesn't make any difference. If you look everywhere in the world, there's an absolutely solid correlation between the likelihood that your vote will change anything and the likelihood that you will vote. Britain has one of the lowest turnouts in elections ever, and has one of the most centralised states with a voting system, which means that your vote is almost certainly pointless. Aileen wouldn't agree. What you have to do is give people a belief that with their vote they can change things. It's not the kids that are apathetic about the bureaucracy, it's the bureaucracy that are apathetic about the kids.
One last question, so I'm going to move ahead now. Yes, sorry, you've been very patient.
Yeah, this is a question, well, it's not a question, it's a point of view. I was been privileged as a teenager in the early 50s to hear the great Referendum speak when they walked along for Brunei. And that man kept the audience spellbound for an hour and 20 minutes. tonight I've seen the same passion from yourself. I'm one of the most recent sustaining members of the Clydesdale Foundation, and the Common Rule project is everything that it should be for Scots. But I'm just concerned from the website. I don't see the website coming out very clearly for a yes. Do you think that is going to come? If not, do you think that the Common Rule can come about if there's a Westminster government? But, you know,
Okay.
We've already had this.
We've been having an email about this today. Very quick, my first response to that is, in West Calder 2 weeks ago, I got a marriage proposal at meeting, but that trumps it compared to my The answer to this is that we were set up with a purpose, which is we want to try and build the largest coalition and consensus for what is the Scotland that we want to have that we possibly can. We want to put a statement on the table, this is how we do it and this is how we build it. We then want to challenge the people involved to say, okay, explain how this can happen. Now, I'm quite straight in this. This is because it can't happen through Westminster. The power of the City of London and the lobbying that takes place within the City of London will prevent the structural change that is necessary. My personal view is I want to put pressure on anyone among the 6 people in Progressive Scotland who haven't come over to the yes side. I want them to answer the question after no, what then? Because here's a proposal, and I can tell you how it works under independence, and I can tell you it ain't going to work. You can do bits of it. There are things that you can do after independence, but the fundamental structural reform of our economy can happen. The Reid Foundation is where we are trying to keep space for everybody. Thankfully, everybody's suddenly turned out to be on the pro-independence side anyway. So it's made it quite easy. We can't find a contributor who isn't pro-independence, that isn't an academic doing social, progressive, academic work left in the country that we can find who isn't a pro-independence supporter. So it's gone that way anyway. Trying to be a little bit subtle, but don't tell anybody that's all.
And we've got one more comment on
on the same subject, how have the political parties responded to the Common Rule project? And what do you think that tells us about them?
The response has been interesting. The Greens have been very strong. I have been to speak to the SNP, who received it quite well. I'm now in a death wrestle to get some of their leadership to recognise that actually the aspirational upper middle classes don't represent the whole of Scotland, and that they should really take a shot at speaking to actual working people who actually want this sort of stuff. The Labour Party, and I'm amazed that Douglas Alexander was quoting Jimmy Reid Foundation and the Commonweal in a speech the other night. Labour suddenly realised it doesn't want to be on the other side of this. And if I could be a bit critical, the SNP at the weekend ruled out the possibility of taking Scotland's grid into collective ownership because it appears to be trembling at the knees that Scottish Power might look disapprovingly at it. Fine. On the same day, to my great joy, we got the full op-ed page in the Sunday Mail, and the Sunday Mail's editorial saying to its largely working class readership, here's a blueprint for Scotland's future. Do you want this? So my message to the political parties are, I think we have arrived through hard work and a little bit of luck, we've arrived at a statement that the Scottish people want. I started out trying to persuade the political parties to listen to us. And I think it's starting to turn around. I'm now going to start telling the political parties, you can join this, or you can get left behind, because this is a statement of what Scotland seems to say that it wants. It's incredibly popular, and the political parties are starting to notice that it's growing without their control. They never like that. Sorry? Well, I mean, I'm working largely with, yes, the Tory. I mean, there's a limitation to my ambition, to be quite honest. So, no, the key is to build a consensus as big and as wide as we can, because one of the key things is, after the referendum, and this is a good thing, we have 2 political parties just now which are frankly too white. And it's only because they hate each other so much that you've got right-wingers and left-wingers in the Labour Party, and you've got right-wingers and you've got left-wingers in the SNP. And the truth is that they hate each other largely for tribal reasons. We need to get this out that we can get a yes so that we can start to rebuild a political consensus in Scotland, not based on animosity but on a vision for what we want to do.
I think it's only right that we should let Aileen have the last words.
Oh, yeah, no, I would maybe kind of characterise the hostility that maybe Robin described within the SNP, because I was there when Robin did the presentation, and there was a great deal of excitement as well. And I think as well, certainly in my own ministerial role, given that I have a responsibility for children and young people, child poverty, all these different things, you know, that's kind of part and parcel of the way that you kind of talk now, as you talk about the Commonweal, and that's how much of a progress Robin and the Jimmy Reid Foundation has made, that is part and parcel of your discussions that you have with stakeholders in everyday meetings now. And I think that's testament to the hard work that Robin and everyone involved with the Jimmy Reid Foundation has put in. So I don't think there's maybe the hostility that Robin describes, and I think there's also, though, a lot of room in the Yes campaign for lots of different views and opinions, and that's something that we should celebrate as well. You know, the Green Party has different views from the SNP about currency and other things about the way the country might move forward beyond independence, and that's a healthy thing, because after independence it won't necessarily be an SNP country that you're voting for, it'll be the country of your choice, and that could be a Conservative, a Labour, an SNP or Liberal Democrat, whatever one you want, they're all kind of Greens, that'll be your choice, and it'll be how you choose to shape the country moving forward. And that democracy, that opportunity is an important thing to remember, that it's not just with the SNP, although if it hadn't been for the SNP we wouldn't be in this position.